October, 1943. High above Germany, hundreds of American bombers move in tight formation. Below, factory workers hear the distant hum growing louder. They look up. And then they see them. Not dozens. Hundreds. B-17 flying fortresses stretching across the sky. One German industrial planner later described the moment as the realization that this was not a raid. It was capacity. By late 1943, Germany began to understand something deeply unsettling. The United States was not merely participating in the war. It was scaling it. And once America reached full production speed, there would be no ceiling. Only increase. When the war began in Europe in 1939, Germany possessed one of the most formidable military machines in the world. Blitzkrieg tactics combined speed, armor, air power, and surprise. Poland fell quickly. France collapsed in weeks. Even Britain was pushed to the brink. German officers had reason to believe that superior doctrine and weapon design could offset numerical disadvantage. For a time, it worked. But war in the 20th century was not decided by initial brilliance. It was decided by endurance. The United States entered the war officially after December 1941. At that moment, American military strength was not overwhelming. The Army was still expanding. The Navy was rebuilding after Pearl Harbor. But what Germany underestimated was not American readiness in 1941. It was American potential in 1943. Because America was not just a country with factories. It was a country built on industrial scaling. And once mobilized, that scaling would accelerate. By 1942, U.S. war production began expanding at extraordinary speed. Automobile plants were converted into tank and aircraft factories. Shipyards operated around the clock. Women entered the workforce in unprecedented numbers. Standardized production methods increased output while reducing complexity. The results were staggering. In 1940, Germany produced more aircraft than the United States. By 1944, the United States produced nearly 100,000 aircraft in a single year. Germany could not match that pace. Consider tanks. Germany produced technologically advanced tanks such as the Panther and Tiger. They were formidable in combat. Heavily armored. Powerful guns. But they were expensive to build. Complex. Difficult to maintain. The United States, meanwhile, produced over 49,000 M4 Sherman tanks during the war. The Sherman was not invincible. It was not the most heavily armored tank on the battlefield. But it was reliable, easy to repair, standardized, and available in massive numbers. Quantity is not everything. But quantity plus reliability becomes momentum. German industrial planners were not ignorant of the imbalance. Albert Speer, appointed Minister of Armaments in 1942, attempted to reorganize German production to increase efficiency. He achieved notable increases despite Allied bombing. But Germany faced structural limitations. Limited access to raw materials. Vulnerability to strategic bombing. Reliance on rail transport networks easily disrupted by air attacks. And perhaps most critically, fuel shortages. By 1944, Allied bombing targeted synthetic fuel plants across Germany. Oil production plummeted. Even when factories produced tanks and aircraft, they often lacked sufficient fuel for training or sustained operations. American oil production, by contrast, remained vast and largely untouched. Fuel is mobility. Mobility is survival. One of the clearest demonstrations of industrial disparity came in the skies over Europe. In 1942, American bomber formations entering German airspace were vulnerable. Losses were heavy. But instead of retreating permanently, American industry responded. Long-range escort fighters such as the P-51 Mustang were produced in increasing numbers. Radar and communications improved. Bomber formations were refined. By 1944, American strategic bombing missions often involved over 1,000 aircraft. German defenders faced wave after wave. Even successful interceptions did not reduce the overall pressure. Because destroyed aircraft were replaced. And replaced quickly. German pilots increasingly described the sky as endless. Not because of one raid. But because there was always another coming. In 1944, during the defense of Normandy and later during the Battle of the Bulge, German commanders encountered the same phenomenon repeatedly. American artillery fire seemed inexhaustible. American vehicle columns seemed endless. Damaged equipment reappeared repaired or replaced within days. German forces, by contrast, struggled to replenish losses. Replacement tanks were delayed. Spare parts were scarce. Training cycles shortened. The imbalance was not merely numerical. It was systemic. America had built a war machine designed for continuous operation. Germany had built a formidable force designed for decisive campaigns. And when decisive campaigns failed to end the war quickly, the structural difference became fatal. There is a recurring theme in German memoirs written after the war. A recognition that the true enemy was not a specific division or general. It was American production. One German officer famously remarked that the war was lost when America entered it. At the time, that statement may have seemed pessimistic. By 1944, it sounded realistic. Because once the United States committed fully to total war production, its output dwarfed that of the Axis powers combined. Not just aircraft. Not just tanks. But trucks. Ships. Artillery shells. Ammunition. Spare parts. Food supplies. Clothing. Medical equipment. War is not sustained by weapons alone. It is sustained by everything behind them. Liberty ships are another example. Built rapidly in American shipyards, these cargo vessels transported supplies across the Atlantic in massive numbers. German U-boats attempted to disrupt this flow. But American shipbuilding outpaced submarine sinkings. For every ship destroyed, more were launched. The arithmetic became impossible to overcome. Germany could destroy. America could replace. And replace faster. The Battle of the Bulge in December 1944 revealed the final dimension of this imbalance. Germany launched a surprise offensive, hoping to split Allied forces and capture critical supply hubs. For a brief period, the attack achieved tactical surprise. But it depended on limited fuel reserves and rapid breakthroughs. When the offensive slowed, German units ran out of fuel. Meanwhile, American logistics recovered quickly despite winter conditions. Supplies flowed. Reinforcements arrived. The German gamble collapsed. Not because of lack of bravery, but because industrial endurance was unequal. By early 1945, American forces crossed the Rhine. German cities were under relentless bombing. Industrial output declined sharply. Transportation networks were shattered. And yet American production continued. Ships crossed the Atlantic. Factories operated at full speed. Aircraft filled the skies. The realization was no longer abstract. It was visible. Germany was fighting a nation that could outproduce it indefinitely. And indefinite production equals inevitability. It is important to understand that Germany did increase production significantly under SPI. In some categories, output rose even under heavy bombing. But increase is relative. If your opponent increases faster, you are still losing ground. The United States did not merely catch up. It surpassed. then multiplied, then sustained. That continuity broke morale. Because when soldiers believe their enemy cannot be exhausted, hope diminishes. And morale is a strategic resource. American industrial mobilization was not chaotic. It was organized. Standardization simplified maintenance. Mass production reduced costs. Redundancy ensured resilience. Training systems expanded to match equipment output. Pilots were trained in growing numbers. Mechanics were trained. Engineers were trained. War became coordinated scaling. Germany relied heavily on innovation and tactical brilliance. America relied on system efficiency. Innovation can win battles. Systems win wars. By the spring of 1945, as Allied forces advanced deep into German territory, the contrast was undeniable. American units moved with fuel, ammunition, and support intact. German units often lacked resupply. Aircraft sat grounded for lack of fuel. Armored formations were under strength. Factories were damaged. Rail lines were broken. The war had shifted from maneuver to inevitability. Because once production imbalance reaches a certain threshold, recovery becomes impossible. Not gradually, but structurally. When Germany surrendered in May 1945, the outcome had been decided months earlier. Not in a single battle. Not in a single bombing raid. But in the cumulative effect of American industrial scaling. Factories in Detroit. Shipyards in California. Steel mills in Pennsylvania. Oil fields in Texas. Millions of workers operating in shifts. That was the real battlefield. And Germany could not bomb it into submission. Because it was too large. Too distributed. Too productive. When German generals laughed at American reliance on machines, they misunderstood something fundamental. Machines do not tire. Supply chains do not lose morale. Production lines do not require inspiration. They require coordination. And coordination can be scaled. Once scaled, it becomes unstoppable. In the end, Germany did not lose solely to American soldiers. It lost to American capacity. To a nation that converted industry into strategy. Converted production into momentum. Converted logistics into inevitability. And once that inevitability became visible, even German commanders understood. This was not a war they could outlast. Because they were no longer fighting divisions. They were fighting a system. And systems, when functioning at scale, do not collapse easily. The realization came slowly. Then suddenly. America could outproduce them. Not once. Not temporarily. But forever. And in industrial war, forever is decisive.